Hello, role-playing people! In this episode I'm going to present you the history and backstory of my Malefactor protagonist so I can properly recap the Demon Chronicle I've been mentioning for a while now. Let's get right into it. Grundel was once known as the Power of Paths, and she was not among the first Malefactors to step outside of the Giver's presence in a time before time when the Giver was the only thing that was. She was not among those who created the first paths into complete and utter nothingness, the first bridges from Giver and into the void. She was not among those who hammered and condensed that absolute nothingness into just nothingness, then slight nothingness, and finally into the tiniest something, which then went boom and brought matter into being. No. She didn't bring matter into creation or anything too important or dramatic. Her purpose was to pull other malefactors back from the void safely, to ward them against a nothingness so intense that it lured careless celestials to their eternal destruction, infecting many who stepped beyond the boundaries of the Giver, though few remember having felt and lived such things. Her long, endlessly winding paths allowed those poisoned by exposure to nothingness to slowly, gradually re-enter being as they cleansed themselves of the void over their extended journeys along her majestic paths. Thus, they would not let the void touch the Giver any more than absolutely necessary, because initially these two opposing forces, Giver and absolute nothingness, were in direct contact. After they were separated by matter, allowing other houses a physical playground and workshop in which to shape the world further and make their own contributions to creation, Grundel watched with endless fascination as Igbachigor of the fourth house weaved his spectacular portals across the cosmos, manipulating space in a manner even malefactors couldn't conceive. It was a great surprise and great joy when our protagonist learned she would be working with this fiend on a very special and quite final task. See, the very first pathways malefactors walked from Giver to Void in order to mine the abyss and bring matter into creation, those paths were still open. The void risked flooding in and touching the Giver again, which at this point was unacceptable. So the Power of Paths and the King of Keys worked together towards banishing the void from creation once and for all, that it may never ever ever touch anything again. She warps those old initial paths back into themselves, redirecting, separating, and looping them infinitely from the outside inward so nothing from the outside can crawl into creation, while he constructs endless arrays of locked gates and loops of portals which prevent nothingness from permeating creation and feeds the void back into itself forever. This is their greatest work, which is nothing compared to what other members of their houses have done. This only crowns and celebrates the efforts of those who came before, but it also brings this malefactor and fiend together in a special union mortals nowadays call love. We fast forward to what happens after the fall. During this time, Grundel joins Dagon's Iron Legion, acting less as humanity's shield and more like humanity's silent refuge, that discreet, kind path that leads to sanctuary and freedom. Her lover joins the Silver Legion, and though they each have their duties which keep them apart, they sometimes meet in secret, through portals and paths only they know of. And for a time, things were euphoric and beautiful, as both of them had proudly joined the rebellion, thinking this is the best thing for both Celestials and mortals. But as the war went on, certain things started putting a strain on their bond, such as the Silver Legion's discovery of the lore of humanity, or the fact that they took in the traitor Schatenkoji, also known as the Ghostsmith. Grundel believed that faith should be given freely without resorting to any kind of trickery or manipulation, such as using the lore of humanity to get under a mortal's skin. Her lover, on the other hand, saw a great deal of potential in this lore, especially for Celestials which hadn't been that close to humanity. Why should those who understand the way people think and feel get all the faith, while hard-working architects such as malefactors and fiends are left with almost nothing? So, this disagreement was slowly eroding their bond, as was the fact that, at some point, Igbachigor stopped sharing what was going on in Tabaet and categorically refused to talk about it. The next thing that gave their relationship a punch in the liver was Schatenkoji's betrayal. He betrayed not only the Alabaster Legion, but the entire point of the rebellion, which was humanity, and the greedy, pathologically curious Silver Legion just took him in with open arms despite his absolutely monstrous crimes against mortals. Unacceptable. So this marked what looked like the beginning of the end for our lovers. Though their bond still lingered, they stopped seeing or even invoking each other. The next time they would come face to face would be after Lucifer's crusade, after the rogue legions are brought back to Genhinnom. During that conflict, as each bastion fell, Grundel saw with her own eyes what the Silver Legion had been doing this whole time, and she, like all others of the Crimson and Iron Legions, was completely appalled. Though she couldn't look her fiend in the eye, she still cared for him deeply. Then, after Dudael also fell to Lucifer's legions, a rumor started spreading. A rumor that almost broke both Grundel and Igbachigor. Someone from the Alabaster Legion claimed they'd found an opening which leads into the abyss, which cannot be, since our Malefactor and Fiend used their absolute best ability and utmost care to seal every single path that leads into the void. The pair made their case officially, presenting in detail the way they had approached their task and sealed off the abyss that it may never ever ever touch creation again. Lucifer himself judged their case and found them not guilty. He reminded everyone of the great sundering which broke the world, the experiments of the Silver Legion, the digs of the Alabaster Legion which tunneled through layers of reality most Celestials other than Ereshkigal Slayers weren't even aware of, and decided it very unlikely that these two hadn't done their duty and task excellently. The portals and paths must have been affected by something else over the course of the war and gave way as a result of being damaged directly, not as a result of initial incompetence. The pair was relieved. Throughout this trial, everyone seemed inclined to blame them and assume incompetence rather than carefully consider the possibilities and assume innocence until guilt is actually proven. Being threatened and ostracized in this way brought them together again, and now that Lucifer himself found them innocent, they believed everything would go back to normal. Of course, it didn't. Despite the outcome of the trial, a lot of fallen of the other houses still blamed them and considered them guilty, incompetent, or even saboteurs for the loyalists, spies and traitors, and so on. The pain of being constantly threatened and doubted was just too great for the Fiend. Just as he'd persuaded Grundel to go to Araboth together and be unmade by their names, a final act of togetherness in a love that cannot continue to exist, Genhinnom went on lockdown and the last siege began. Michael and his loyalists descended on the cathedral, and 40 days later, the rebels were marched to the pit. As they dove into the abyss, one by one, Both Grundel and Igbachigor realized what had actually happened and why the void could be felt once more. Their pathways and gates never fell to the void. See, they were designed to protect and deflect nothingness coming from the outside inward, which is exactly what they did. Looking at the tunnels that led to the abyss as they dove into their prison, these were made by a celestial who, in pure desperation, had tore through the seals from the inside outward to go deeper, and that was something the barriers weren't designed to withstand. I mean, who would actively want nothingness to invade creation by breaking the seals from within? No, this was not done intentionally. This was done out of pure fear by a member of the Alabaster Legion. And judging by the evidence left behind, even that path, the one that led into the void, had been collapsed by someone, and the void was still sealed. The Malefactor and Fiend had done their job flawlessly. As the Fallen were now imprisoned right on the threshold between being and absolute nothingness, they could feel the pull of that abyss as well as the presence of creation, but would forever remain untouched by these two opposing forces. Our lovers announced to everyone, "See, we were right, we did our job well, we are not guilty." But at this point, the others either didn't care or got so used to hating these two that they had no intention of stopping. Certainly Lucifer would have sided with them and protected them from the others, but he wasn't in the abyss, was he? At least Dagon was keeping her safe for now, but the pit was pure fear and anxiety for the both of them, since they had huge targets on their backs. Oh, if only they'd packed their bags for Araboth a little sooner. At least then they could have died together. An eternity later, after some of the rebels had been miraculously pulled from the pit, including the 5 archdukes, Igbachigor was also summoned. This gave Grundel great hope, since she knew her beloved Fiend wouldn't just forget her in this hellhole. Another eternity later, she was still in this nowhere, surrounded by bullies and tormentors, alone to be misjudged and hated by everyone. So now, her only hope for freedom was destruction from within creation. She had seen the effects of the maelstroms and knew if a single desperate celestial had broken through at some point from within creation into the outside, these storms which rattled the collective cage of the fallen might one day break it. But each maelstrom was a result of agony and death, the world grinding itself into nothing, souls being thrown into hell. And though she had once been part of the Iron Legion, the idea of personal freedom was now more important to her than billions of agonizing mortal souls. To hell with everyone and everything. She had always been loyal to the rebellion, and this is the thanks she gets. But wait, the most recent maelstrom bent the walls and bars of the prison, from within creation exactly as she'd predicted. With freedom in sight, all she needs is something to latch onto, or maybe someone. In the meantime, Terrell Stone is ODing in his tent on Skid Row. He doesn't deserve to die like this. Then again, who does? He had always been such a good kid, you know, before his mother died of the same poison that's killing him right now. Before his father's associates hurt him badly and his own father refused to believe it had happened. So Terrell, in desperation, stole every dollar and cent he could from his last remaining parent, from the church, from Dad's employers, and ran away as far as he could from the east to the west coast, determined to never come back. When he got off the car, he still had a backpack full of cash, enough to last him a few months, But the local gangs smelled that money a mile away and robbed him on his first day being in LA. Getting stuck on the row, surrounded by violence and illness of all kinds, barely subsisting and witnessing some truly horrible things, eventually led to drug use. What drew Grundel to this young man in particular was his crippling fear and isolation and pain. Just as she'd been surrounded by rebels who wished her harm in the pit, knowing not a single moment of peace, Terrell was surrounded by predators of all kinds and in this asphalt wasteland, in an open prison without gates or walls, surrounded by human beings, and yet unimaginably alone, deprived of any support or kindness. As she desperately grabs onto the human flesh and forces herself into it, Grundel draws her very first breath ever before rolling on her side and vomiting violently all over the tent. The sensory overload is unbearable after being deprived for so long. So many senses, so many internal and external processes she's never experienced before, and all of them feel and hurt. In between the spasms and vomiting, she moans and whispers a path into existence, the shortest path she's ever created, a small, dark tube devoid of light and sound, invisible and inaccessible to anyone but her. With her last bit of strength, she crawls onto the path and passes out. As you can imagine, the following days are a horrifying process of self-discovery. Grundel realizes her new body needs water, food, sleep, cleaning, has very small parameters of temperatures it can withstand, it needs to excrete things, and so on. So she gradually exposes herself through the world, through her mortal senses, and ventures outside her tube path more and more, but slowly. The memories take a while to fully settle, but luckily for her, no other mortals seem to want to interact anyway. If she detects any sign of hostility from anyone, she can just run, lay a path to safety, and lay low until any pursuer loses her trace. So she creates a little collection of paths into nearby buildings, which she frequents predominantly at night. Somehow, though she doesn't really understand where this knowledge came from, she seems to know exactly which buildings contain food and drink, which ones contain showers or toilets, which ones contain clothes. By the time she fully understands her name is now Terrell Stone, she's already set up a nice little network of byways which gives her everything she needs and keeps her safe. She even makes a new acquaintance, a mortal called Trevor, who seems to be even more vulnerable than she is, but trapped in the same horrible situation, so she offers him assistance, access to resources, and safety. Now, Trevor manipulates Terrell Grundel into using his abilities to provide resources for others in need, since he has ways of getting into any building he wants easily. So Terrell breaks into multiple places, stealing various things, and as a result, though they are still homeless, him and Trevor gain notoriety on the row as the people who can get you anything you want or fix any broken object for a small fee. The gangs are not an issue at this point, since Terrell has multiple paths that lead to safety, so this whole operation works and money keeps coming in. Now, Terrell is still caught on the video cameras of some places he broke into and is arrested and jailed multiple times as a result over the next months, but there's no reasonable explanation for how he got in, since all the doors of these buildings remained locked. There were no signs of forced entry, and of course he always kept his mouth shut about what had happened, just as Trevor told him, so ultimately the charges were either trespassing or petty theft, or were dropped altogether. After the mortal memories fully settle, Grundel understands Tyrell's situation and world a little bit better. Because of all the uses of her lores and her problems with the law, she is discovered by another fallen, a devil known to everyone as Mr. Dixon, the wealthy owner of a record label and multiple studios. This Dixon individual makes Tyrell and Trevor a very profitable offer. They are to maintain and enhance his studio equipment, and in exchange they get a nice place to live, monthly pay, but most importantly, Grundel will be introduced to the local court of the fallen, becoming a member of the community. Knowing full well how hated she was in the pit, she immediately jumps at the opportunity to be under the wing of a powerful devil. In the following 2 years, given her exceptional intellectual ability, Grundel Tyrell finishes school and also gains the mortal understanding of electrical devices, receiving all necessary certification. With Dixon's support and her ability to enhance things, she even starts her own company, manufacturing high-quality amplifiers. The story of the young homeless man who goes from rags to riches in only 2-3 years makes headlines as expected, bringing wanted and unwanted attention. Luckily, her pacts are safe and out of anyone's reach, given that both of them are touring musicians, always on the road. The money is really good at this point, the fame is just enough for good marketing, and survival doesn't seem to be an issue under Dixon's protection, despite growing tensions between Grundel and the other fallen. See, it only took one other demon to recognize her celestial name and remember who she was for things to go back to how they were in the pit. Everyone in LA disliked and mistrusted her, just waiting for their chance to jump at her, despite the fact that she was now a fell knight, she was a noble fallen. They certainly enjoyed making use of her lores, trading favors and services as the courts and houses often do, but no one wanted to have any personal ties to her or even speak to her more than was strictly necessary, not even those of her own house. And it was then, in that isolation, a new wave of memories came to her in a dream. Memories of her lover, Igbachigor. Why had he never reached out to her? Where was he? He'd made it out of the pit so long ago, and she invoked his name every day, but there was no response. Though she couldn't trust anyone, she desperately needed to find him and needed to find some answers, so she asked Dixon to put the word out that she's looking for information on a particular celestial. And then, finally, the Cryptics make contact. Unlike everyone else, they are not in a hurry to judge her for her past and, surprisingly, offer their full support in exchange for her loyalty and cooperation. After a breathtaking pilgrimage to Thalam'kudan, the first mountain, holiest site of the Malefactors, and after multiple good interactions with the Cryptics, including Arimal himself, she decides this is the group for her. This is where she belongs. These are the fallen she wants to work with and be loyal to. Not long after joining them, and after tensions keep rising in LA, Grundel receives word that the Cryptics need her in Toronto, of all places, to work her magic on some very sensible, very expensive medical equipment. Knowing that all accommodations are already made and paid for by her faction, Grundel leaves Trevor in charge of her property and business because he is more than capable, and gets on the first plane to Toronto. And this is where the actual game finally begins. I know, a lot of backstory, but it all contributes to the Chronicle, I promise. What awaits Grundel in Toronto? We will find out soon. Take care, have fun, and don't forget to play.